My name is Tom Bach. I am the pastor of Just Passing Through this church. And Pastor Barry and Chuck. I get to do the introduction because Chuck is not feeling well, so he's at home. And what I would like to do is I'd like to open up and pray for Israel right now, and pray for this gathering, and pray for Chuck as well, if you're okay with that. So Father, I just give you thanks. It is a good night to watch someone with the gifting and talent of Sherry to come and present to us the converts to the genealogy of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. We just give you thanks for that. But our hearts are heavy too for what's going on in the Middle East. For Israel, your people, your chosen people, who feel there's no recourse but to defend their homeland. But at what cost? Father, we just ask for your intervention. And they do have a right to protect themselves. But I pray for also the Palestinian people as well. Those that will suffer the consequences of people that didn't really care. So we ask for you to move, presence to be felt, give peace in that place. We ask, Father, also for Chuck, that you would heal him as Jesus has done in the atonement, that he be healed and able to join us tomorrow, Father, as we celebrate and worship you in the morning. We just give you thanks, give you glory, give you honor. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Thank you. So knowing one's ancestry is important in many cultures, but maybe none so critical as in the society of ancient Israel. Both Matthew and Luke list the genealogy of Jesus, but the lists are not identical. The inheritance flows through the paternal genealogy of an Israelite. We know that Joseph was not Jesus' father. Jesus was conceived by the power of the Holy Spirit, but Jesus' legal genealogy, as listed in the book of Matthew, follows the line of his earthly father, Joseph. He adopted him. Isn't that cool? Luke follows the bloodline of Jesus to his mother Mary. Both genealogical lists converge in King David. God decreed that all kings of Israel would descend from David. So both legally and from his bloodline, Jesus, the King of Kings, is a descendant of the tribe of Judah. Traditionally, genealogy is traced only through the male line, but Matthew includes 4 women in this genealogical line: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. Why would Matthew diverge from tradition, especially since his gospel was written primarily for the Jewish people? We know that the Messiah would come from the Jews. The Bible makes it clear that Jews are God's chosen people, and God chose a small, unimportant nation to be an example of what he could do to provide and guide a nation that followed his precepts. In fact, God chose them from the time of Abraham, before they were a nation. In Genesis, God said to Abram that he would make him a great nation. God would make his name great, and in him all the families of the earth would be blessed. Genesis 12, 1-3. Salvation comes through the Jews, but God's plan of salvation was always intended to extend to the whole earth. Perhaps that is the reason Matthew included the 4 women in his genealogical record, to show that God's plan of salvation was for Jews and non-Jews, male and female, slave and free. From the beginning, God intended to make a way for all the people who would choose him to enter his eternal kingdom. Enjoy.
The Lord has blessed me. I have a husband who loves me. He loved me even when I was barren. By the time I finally conceived, I had given up hope. I was an old woman, 90 years old. It had long since ceased to be with me according to the way of women. 90 years old and with child? Unheard of. Unheard of, but true. My son Isaac is now a young man, no longer a boy. Soon it will be time to seek a wife for him. I fear I will not live to see my daughter-in-law, much less my grandchildren. And there are words of wisdom I want to share with them. How can I possibly do that? My new maid, Miyaka. She's a young woman. I can tell her, and she can take my words to them. Miyaka, come here. Miyaka, I am going to entrust you with something very precious. My legacy for the family the blessed Isaac will one day sire. I know that you are a married woman, so surely you understand that there are words a mother wants to share with her son's helpmeet. I fear I will not live to see that day, so please treasure my words in your heart and share them when the time is right. I want Isaac's wife to know that Isaac is a miracle. He is a child of promise. When the angel promised Abram that he would be the father of multitudes, he had not even one child, and we were both well advanced in years. Without divine intervention, Isaac would not exist. And when he was born, I was well past childbearing age. And tell her that Abram loves me. He loved me even when it was clear that I could not bear him children. He certainly could have taken another wife who could have given him heirs, but he chose to remain faithful to me. I hope that Isaac loves his wife as Abram loves me, that she will feel as secure and as treasured as I do. I suppose she should know where we come from. Both Abram and I were born and raised in Ur, a city on the banks of the Euphrates River. Abram was 10 years old when I was born. I remember watching him play with a rowdy group of boys in the neighborhood. And Abram was always the leader. Even at a young age, he was innovative and charismatic. People wanted to follow him. When we became adults, we were married in Ur. And Abram built rooms in his father's house for us. Within a few years, Abram's father, Terah, decided to move the family to Haran on the plain between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Unlike Ur, Haran was far from the water. And I missed living near the river, watching the wildlife come to drink, seeing the trading ships floating by, hearing the exotic languages of the merchants as they passed through. In Haran, we lived in tents like nomads. I tried my best, but it just never felt like home. I think Abram must have felt like I did about Haran, for when his father Terah died, and the angel told him to move, he quickly moved us to the mountains of Canaan. We took with us our nephew Lot and the livestock and the servants of both households. I had hoped we would build a permanent home there, but we continued to live in tents. I suppose that was just as well, for in a few years there was a great famine in the land, and we fled to Egypt. Abram found a wonderful place to situate our camp near the Nile River. Oh, it very quickly felt like home. It was just as lush and beautiful as the Euphrates. After the camp was established, Abram said he would tell everyone we met that I was his sister, lest the Egyptians kill him to take me as a wife. I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud at the thought. I was over 60 years old. I may have been a beauty in my youth, but now Of course, I was delighted that my husband still found me desirable, but I sincerely doubted that strangers would do the same. Much to my chagrin, Abram was right. And very soon, the Egyptian Pharaoh sent a contingent of soldiers to collect me and add me to his harem. It was a terrifying thought, the thought of being alone with a man who was not my husband. God was so gracious. Before I was ever summoned to Pharaoh's chambers, God spoke to Pharaoh in a dream and told him that he was wrong to take me, that I was a married woman. Pharaoh ordered us to leave Egypt, but he did give Abram gifts of livestock and servants and gold, and we returned to Canaan. Be sure you tell Isaac's wife this story. I want her to know these things about me. I want her to know that I honored and obeyed my husband. When we moved from Haran to Canaan, I did not complain. When we fled to Egypt, I did not question him. I did not refuse to be taken into Pharaoh's harem, though I did make sure that Abram knew I was not pleased about it. I just hope that Isaac's wife will honor my son as I have honored his father. I wonder if Abram told Isaac this story, how he lied to save himself when we went to Egypt. To be fair, it wasn't totally a lie. Terah was Abram's father. He was also mine. We had different mothers, but the same father. That makes it all the more amazing that Abram did not take another wife when it was clear that I could not bear him children. Terah did. But Abram chose to remain true to me. He's a faithful man. Faithful and patient. 10 years passed since the angel first told Abram he would be the father of multitudes. 10 years. That is such a long time to wait, seeing no fulfillment of the promise. I began to wonder if maybe God was waiting for us to do something, to take steps to bring the promise to fruition. I had a young servant, Hagar, who was given to us when we left Egypt. Hagar was docile and obedient. Maybe it was God's plan that Hagar would be a surrogate for me. So I urged Abram to go into Hagar and to produce a child through her. That was such a mistake. The relationship between Hagar and me changed immediately. She very quickly conceived a child for Abram and adopted an air of superiority over me. Her haughtiness and her sneering became almost more than I could bear. I assigned her the most unpleasant household tasks. Once I even beat her. But her attitude did not change. Within a few months, Hagar ran away. Oh, I was concerned, as anyone would be for a woman alone in the wilderness. But I will admit I was not unhappy that she was gone. Unfortunately, within a few days, she returned, and her attitude was outwardly better. But I knew that she was just masking how much she despised me. When it came time for Hagar to give birth to her son Ishmael, she sat on my lap so that the child would pass through her legs and also through mine. It was an ancient posture for a surrogate, but it fooled no one. Everyone knew that Ishmael was her son and not mine. And as the years passed, my despair grew. I watched Hagar nurse and raise her son. I watched Abram delight in him. Oh, I rejoiced that Abram finally had his child of promise. But I grieved that I was not the one to provide it for him. When Ishmael was about 13 years old, the Lord again visited Abram, and he made a new covenant with him, a covenant marked by the circumcision of all the men in the household. Ishmael and Abram were circumcised with the rest. And then he changed his name from Abram, which means exalted father, to Abraham, which means father of multitudes. Father of multitudes. Did that mean that Ishmael would bear many children? Hagar certainly seemed to think so, and her attitude became even more insufferable than before. I was not sure how I could tolerate it. After Ishmael was born, I felt that I would never again have cause to laugh. But God in his grace and his mercy brought forth the child of promise through the barren woman. And within a year, I conceived our first child. When he was born, we named him Isaac, which means laughter. And for the first time in so many years, my heart was filled with joy. Now, through Isaac, Abram would indeed be the father of multitudes. And I was a part of this new covenant. I was indeed a princess, the mother of a holy nation. Hated that hard hat too. My dear Ruth, yes, come in, sit down. Oh, have a nice rest. I just have time before Shabbat to finish sweeping and make us both a nice cup of tea. So, do I hear that you are maybe having some difficulties adjusting to life here in Bethlehem? Was it not easier being exposed to the Hebrew culture when you lived in Naomi's house in Moab? But it is always more difficult to move into a completely new culture in a strange land. And do I not know how difficult that transition can be? Did you not know that I am not a Hebrew? I too am a convert to believe in the one true God. Let me tell you my story. It may help. It couldn't hurt. As a young woman, I ran an inn in Jericho. Oh, I did enjoy it. It was so exciting. You never knew who would come through the door from day to day. And do not look at me like that. Do you not know there are honorable women who run inns? Only wish that the feminine word for innkeeper was not the same as the word for prostitute. I'm sure there are many women who combine the two businesses, but I did not. And I quickly learned to clarify to every new guest that I was an innkeeper and nothing more. I inherited the inn from my father, who got it from his father. True, my brother should have inherited, but they were no good at it. I was the one who made sure that the money was collected. I was the one who made sure that the linens were changed. I was the one who procured provisions. I was the one who ran the inn when our father was ill or traveling. Even so, it took me years to convince my father to leave the inn to me. And is that not a moot point now? For surely you heard that Jericho was completely destroyed. It was common knowledge to everyone who lived in the Jordan Valley. But did you know that I was there that day? I was born and raised in Jericho. Wasn't it a thriving city? Right along the King's Highway and near the Jordan River? Wasn't it a beautiful city, tucked into the foothills of the mountains that divided the Jordan Valley from the Great Sea? It was called the City of Palm Trees, an oasis in the wilderness. Jericho was a walled city. I do not know if it's true, but I was told that before I was born, the walls were made thicker and higher because of the Hebrew nation. We heard how God had brought the Hebrew nation out of Egypt, how he had led them and guided them and protected them, how he divided the Red Sea before them so they could walk across on dry land with their animals and their families and their carts. Dry land under the seabed. Is that not a miracle? We heard how their God gave them water in the desert, how he led them as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Oh, the thought of such a God, one God, it called to my heart. And I'm sure you can understand that. In Jericho, we worshipped a number of gods. We had gods of fertility, gods of war, gods of harvest, gods of the moon and the evening star. But the gods of Jericho seemed, well, capricious. Every year, didn't the farmers offer great sacrifices to their gods? And some years they had abundant harvest. And some years there was famine. Their gods seemed not at all influenced by their sacrifices. Common sense told me that such whimsical gods were not truly gods at all. But what we heard of the God of the Hebrews, he was different. He was engaged in the lives of his people. He was interested in more than just sacrifices. He showed himself strong on their behalf. And so, when we heard that the Hebrew nation was coming toward our land, didn't the king of Jericho become understandably concerned and ordered that our fortifications be reinforced? The Hebrews camped at Kadesh Barnea, and from there they attacked the mountain communities of the Amalekites and the Canaanites. And didn't my ancestors breathe a sigh of relief when the Hebrew warriors were routed and retreated to the wilderness of Zin? And we heard no more from them for 40 years. And it was a very important 40 years. For during that time, was I not born and grew to adulthood? After 40 years, the Hebrew nation was on the move again, this time traveling east of the Jordan River and the Great Sea. And did they not set up camp directly across the Jordan River from Jericho? And was the Jordan not at flood stage at the time? But what obstacle would that be for a God capable of parting the Red Sea? The wall of Jericho encompassed my inn, and they had left me a small window in an upper floor. At night, I could climb up and look out that window. In the night sky, I could see the glow of the Hebrew campfires across the river. Everyone in Jericho was on edge. What would happen? Would they attack our city, or would they move further north? Even though the Hebrew nation was camped right across the river, didn't caravans continue to travel on the King's Highway? And didn't guests come and stay at my inn? After years in the business, I had developed an ability to recognize a guest's nationality from his clothing and his dialect. One day, 2 men came seeking lodging. Their clothing and their dialect were not familiar. In my heart of hearts, did I not know that these men were from the Hebrew camp across the river? I gave them my standard welcoming speech, including no undue familiarity. I assigned them rooms on an upper floor of the inn. I told them dinner would be served when the gates for the city were closed for the night. Then didn't I suggest some sights of the city they might enjoy and shooed them out into the streets? And didn't they not return quickly and obviously distressed? I guessed I was not the only one who recognized they were foreigners. And did I not know that the king of Jericho would be seeking their lives? There was no time to waste. I quickly took the men up to the roof deck. I had shafts of flax drying on the deck, preparation for weaving them into linens for the inn. I laid a layer of flax on the roof. I had the men lay on top of that, and I covered them with another layer of flax. That way, they would not be visible to anyone underneath them on the roof deck or above them on the city walls. Then did I not hurry back downstairs just as a squad of soldiers stormed into the inn, demanding to know where were the strangers? Did I not know that it would mean my life if they were discovered? And was my heart not pounding so loudly I could hardly hear the soldiers, even though they were shouting at me? And did I not will myself to appear calm? I acknowledged the strangers had come seeking lodging, and then they had ventured out into the city, and then they had abruptly returned, and then I lied. I told the soldiers that the strangers had just abruptly left again, and undoubtedly were seeking to escape before the city gates were closed for the night. And didn't my lie work? For half of the soldiers bolted out the door in pursuit. And didn't the other half of the soldiers search the inn, ransacking every room? And didn't they spend an inordinate amount of time searching the kitchen, wolfing down much of the food and trampling underfoot what they did not eat. As they prepared to leave, I lied again. And this time I felt no remorse or fear in doing so. I told them that undoubtedly the strangers were heading for the river, and if they hurried, they could overtake them. When the soldiers left, I climbed and looked out my window. And didn't I chuckle as I saw the soldiers' torches fan out toward the river. After making sure there was no one around, I quickly brought the men down from the roof and took them to an upper room of the inn. Didn't I know that they would have overheard my discussion with the soldiers? So, before they could ask, I explained. I told them that we had heard about their God, how he led and protected his people from their presence in Jericho. Did I not guess that their God had promised our land to his people? And I was convinced their God was faithful to fulfill his promises, and I did not want to be counted among his enemies. I told the men I could lower them by a rope to the ground, and then I suggested that they head west to the hills and hide for a few days until our soldiers returned. Then they could safely return to the Hebrew camp across the river. I did not know if it was a promise they could make, but I asked, when they came to conquer Jericho, could they save my family? And didn't one of the men take a red sash from his waist and give it to me and tell me to tie it on the window? And when they returned to possess the land, anyone in the house flagged with the red sash would be saved. And then the men disappeared into the darkness. Night after night, I looked out my window, but the light from the Hebrew campfires did not come closer. I knew they would come. I just didn't know when. And did I not have preparations to make? For I knew the God of the Hebrews was a God worthy of honor, and him alone. And did I not have many idols that I had inherited in my inn? Did I not start every night stealing downstairs, taking the wooden idols and throwing them into the kitchen fire? And did I not take the stone idols and shove them out the window, trusting that they would shatter into unrecognizable shards when they hit the ground? And did I not worry that my neighbors would hear the noise and become suspicious, knowing that I had no explanation that could save my life? One morning, as I was sweeping the inn, I heard a great commotion outside. I went through the door and I heard people in the street shouting to one another that the Hebrews were coming across the river. I went to look. Their God had once again done a miracle in their behalf and had held back the swollen waters of the Jordan River, and they were crossing on dry ground. I knew I could no longer hold my peace, and I called to my family to come and to join me in the inn. I told them that Jericho would be conquered. The only place of safety would be my inn. I begged them to gather their belongings and come and join me at the inn, but not to bring any of their household idols. And didn't some of my family thoughtfully consider my words? And didn't some scoff and laugh and turn and go back to their homes? And to this day, do I not weep for the stubbornness of their hearts? The Hebrews set up a camp at Gilgal, just a few miles from Jericho. But they did not leave their camp for nearly a week. And then one morning, wasn't I awakened by the distant sound of trumpets? The Hebrew priests were blowing their trumpets and leading the army toward Jericho. Then they did a most peculiar thing. They did not attack the city. They turned and they walked around Jericho, silently. The only sound, the trumpets and the soft clanking of the warriors' weapons as they walked. And then they returned to their camp at Gilgal. They repeated this procession the next day, and the next, and the next. At first, everyone in Jericho was on edge, waiting for action that did not come. And then our soldiers began to mock and to jeer at the Hebrews and their God. And their disdain spread through the city. Jericho had withstood sieges before. Soon, I was the only one who believed that Jericho was doomed. They marched around Jericho 6 days. The 7th day was different, though we did not notice the change at first. They came and they marched around Jericho as they had before. But then, instead of returning to Gilgal, they marched around again, and again, and again. And I knew that the time had come, and I cried out to my family to come and join me at the inn. The Hebrews marched around Jericho 7 times, and the 7th time they stopped and turned, each man facing the city. And then the priests blew a loud blast on their trumpet, and the warriors gave a great shout. And then there was an eerie silence, and I felt the ground begin to tremble beneath my feet, and I heard the roar of the buildings and the walls of Jericho collapsing into ruin. The Hebrew army marched into Jericho, conquering everything before it. My family and I huddled in the middle of the inn. Outside we could hear all the sounds of battle, the human cries and screams, the animals bellowing. We covered our ears to try to block out the horrifying sounds, the cacophony of agony. Oh. Finally, the 2 men I had hidden came through the door. They told us to gather our belongings and to follow them out of the city. When I stepped out the door, I could see that my inn was the only building left standing in all of Jericho. I did not want to see the destruction that surrounded me, but I could not help but look as I picked my way through the ruins and the carnage. When we finally reached the outskirts of the city, I heard a low rumble behind me. I did not need to turn and look, for I knew it was my inn collapsing into ruin. I wondered what would happen now. I had asked them to save our lives, and indeed they had done so. But what now? Would they abandon us? Would they leave us to fend for ourselves in the wilderness? They were more gracious than I could have imagined. They led us to their camp at Gilgal, And on the edge of the camp, they had a large tent set up for us, replete with food and water and firewood. And as the years passed and they moved from location to location, they took us with them. Though they always made sure our tent was on the edge of the camp. Salmon, one of the men I had hidden, came to check on us at least once a day. He made sure that we had everything that we needed. And as I came to know him better, I begged him to teach me about his God. None of the gods of Jericho had ever inspired me, but the God of the Hebrews was a God who revealed himself to his people, who desired that his people would know him as he knew them. Salmon was a good provider and an excellent teacher. And as he told me about the God of the Hebrews, I knew that here was a God I could trust and love. In time, Salmon and I were married, and we were delighted when Boaz, our firstborn, arrived. Now I had a husband and a family and a God I could honor and worship. My dear Ruth, we believe that God has provided you to be a wife for our Boaz. I know that you too have found the true living God. And I know that God has a purpose and a plan for your life. David, no, do not cry, little one. Oh, it gives me such pain to hear you in such distress. Oh, yes, now come to Grandma Ruth. Oh, yes, yeah, now is that not better? Oh, yeah. Oh, such a big boy. I think you are eating well, little one, for I believe that you grow heavier every day. Oh, I am sorry to tell you this, my little one, but at my age, I simply do not have the strength to hold you for long. Now, I am going to put you down. Will you promise me you will not cry? Oh, that's my big boy. Oh, yes. Oh, my. You know, I believe that you resemble your great-grandfather Boaz. I think you have his nose, and his strong, determined chin. Oh, you know, I did not believe I would ever have children of my own, much less grandchildren, and now so many great-grandchildren. Oh, I wish Boaz could see you. He would be so delighted for you and for your brothers. Oh, yeah. no, you promised not to cry. No, I know. Oh, so you do not need to be held. Is it enough that I just talk to you? I can do that. I can talk to you. What shall I talk about? I know. I shall tell you my story. It is your heritage too. This may surprise you, but I am not a Hebrew. You smile. I knew it would surprise you. No, I am a foreigner. So you want to know how I have come to Bethlehem? It's a good story, I tell you. Long ago, you had a distant relative, Elimelech. There was great famine in Israel. So Elimelech took his wife and his 2 sons to my homeland of Moab. In Moab, we had food. Not in abundance, but we had enough. And so Elimelech brought his family to Moab. Well, in due time, Elimelech died in Moab. But at that time, his sons were old enough to be married. And so their mother, the blessed Naomi, found Moabite wives for her sons. My friend Orpah married her son Kilian, and I married her son Mahlon. And so Orpah and I moved into the house where Naomi lived with our husbands. It is always challenging to move from your father's home into the home of your husband and his family. And so many things are different, especially when the culture is different, yeah? So there were differences in food, in clothing, but especially in religion. In Moab, we served a number of gods, large gods, small gods. But Naomi and her sons served only one God. And as we went into their home, we saw they had no shrines to household idols. This was a new concept for Orpah and me. And as Naomi taught us how to cook her son's favorite foods, she also taught us about her God. And her God desired to be invested in the lives of his people and that they would care for one another. In her homeland, all the nation was considered family, and they served one another with honor. And so Naomi taught us to care for our families and to care for our neighbors. In what seemed too short a time, Kilian and Mahlon died. And we were 3 widows alone with no one to provide for us. And so Naomi decided it would be best for her to return to her homeland of Israel, where her countrymen would receive her as family and would help her. So Orpah and I packed what we could carry and began our journey. As we were packing, Naomi considered the future for Orpah and me. She knew from her experience how difficult it is to live in a foreign culture in a strange land. We had barely started our journey when Naomi stopped, and she told Orpah and me to return to our father's houses. For we were young women yet, and our fathers could find for us new husbands who would provide for us and give us children. It was not an easy choice. We had come to love Naomi and the God she had revealed to us. After many tears, Orpah agreed. And it broke my heart as I watched her turn and begin the trek back to our village. Then Naomi turned to me to hug me and to kiss me goodbye, but I stopped her. I could not return to the empty worship of impotent idols. No, I told her that I would never leave her nor forsake her. that where she went, I would go. Where she lodged, I would lodge. That her people would be my people, and her God would be my God. When Naomi realized I could not be dissuaded, we picked up our packs and continued walking toward Israel. In Israel, we found a small hut in which we could live. It was the beginning of the barley harvest. And Naomi told me that in her country, the poor were allowed to come in after the reapers had gone through a field. The poor could come and glean the grain that was left on the ground and on the stalks. It was a way of providing for the poor. So the next morning I took a sack and walked to the nearest field to begin gleaning. I believe the God of Israel ordained my steps, for the field that I went to was owned by your great-grandfather Boaz, who was a close relative of Naomi. As a stranger, the workers quickly noticed me and began to make inquiries about me. Bethlehem is a small town, and many people knew that Naomi had returned, and they knew my relationship to her. For Naomi's sake, Boaz told his workers to allow me to glean with others from the town and to protect me. At noontime, Boaz approached me personally. He told me to follow his workers from field to field and not to glean in the fields of other landowners who might take advantage of me. He had shown me great kindness, and I did as he said. All too soon, the barley harvest was ended. Thanks to the generosity of Boaz, I had gleaned a surplus of food for Naomi and me, but it was not enough to last us through the spring and the summer until the fall harvest. I stayed the last night of the barley harvest. I stayed late in the field to watch the winnowing. Oh, to this day, I enjoy watching the winnowing. Great bales of grain tossed into the air, and the wind blows away the leaves and the stalks, and the grain falls free. You know, I believe the God of Israel has winnowed my life and blown me free of the empty worship of idols, and I have fallen free to worship the living God. In Israel, the winnowing always happens in the late afternoon and early evening, when the temperature changes cause great winds to come from the valley over the hilltops. So it was late when it was ended, and I did not stay to watch the oxen thresh the grain, for I knew that Naomi would worry about me. And I suspected that as in my homeland of Moab, after the threshing would be a great celebration. All the landowners and the workers would feast and drink in celebration of a successful harvest. And then many of the men would sleep on the threshing floor, partly to protect the grain from animals and poachers, and partly so that those who had celebrated too heartily would have a chance to sleep it off before navigating their way back home. When I got home, Naomi had prepared a simple meal for us. After we had dined, she made a very odd request of me. She told me to bathe, don my finest clothes, and go back to the threshing floor under cover of darkness. I was to wait in the shadows and watch where the men lay to sleep, particularly to be aware of where Boaz lay. And then, when he was asleep, I was to climb near his feet and cover myself with the edge of his blanket. The Hebrew culture gives women greater opportunities than any society I had ever known. For in extreme circumstances, a Hebrew woman could ask a man to marry her. Crawling under the corner of Boaz's blanket was a way of asking him to cover me with his mantle of authority and protection. Boaz fell asleep quickly, and when I heard his rhythmic breathing, I did as Naomi had suggested, and I lay there very quietly through the night. In the middle of the night, Boaz awake, and he sat up quickly, and he asked who I was and what I was doing so close to him. I quietly explained. He told me to stay, and he would take care of the situation in the morning. Neither of us slept the rest of the night. Boaz tossed and turned as he was considering the possibilities. I lay very still, wondering what Boaz thought of my brazen request. Shortly before dawn, Boaz arose. He told me to hold out my cloak, and he filled it with an abundance of grain and sent me back home. When I returned, I told Naomi all that had happened, and she seemed content that all would be well. Apparently, when Elimelech had left Israel, before they had gone, he had sold family land that he owned. And when that money ran out and the famine continued, he took his family to Moab. Now, as a widow of Israel, it was incumbent upon Naomi's family to provide for her future. One way of doing that was to redeem the family land that Elimelech had sold. And since I was a widow of Mahlon, I also was a part of that responsibility, for my firstborn child would inherit that family land. I knew that Boaz was a close relative. I knew that he was a kind and an honorable man. But there was another relative who had a closer connection to Naomi, and he would have the first choice of purchasing and redeeming that land and the two widows. I stood and fretted over the outcome. I knew Boaz. I did not know this other relative. I did not know what would happen. I stood and I prayed. Naomi just sat calmly. She knew that the God who created heaven and earth would work on our behalf. That afternoon, your great-grandfather Boaz came to visit Naomi and brought with him his father Salmon. Boaz had indeed redeemed the family land, and they came to ask for my hand in marriage. I breathed such a sigh of relief. Naomi just smiled. She knew it would all work. Boaz and I were married, and we have so much family. And you, my little one, are such a blessing. Father, Lord, I pray that you guard and guide the steps of this little one, Lord. I do not know what you have planned for his life. He may be a farmer, he may be a shepherd, he may be a warrior. He should be a worshiper, Lord. May he worship you and seek your heart, Lord, with all of his mind, all of his soul, and all of his strength. Amen and amen. will follow you all of my days. And step by step you'll lead me, and I will follow you all of my days. Thank you for coming. I just ask that Father bless each one of you, each of your lives, every step that you take. We have cookies, coffee, lemonade, and I invite you to stay and fellowship. If you have questions, if you have comments, as a church we offer free hugs and free prayers, so I recommend that you avail yourself of both of them. Thank you again.